breaking barriers and pushing for change in Washington.
Now, California's new Senator Alex Padilla is answering your questions on the issues that matter across our state.
COVID-19 relief,
Gun violence,
immigration reform,
voting rights.
all in an exclusive statewide town hall event.
Broadcasting across the Golden State, this is Inside California Politics.
Thank you for joining us for this Inside California Politics Town Hall. I'm Frank Buckley in Los Angeles.
And I'm Nikki Lorenzo in Sacramento. On January 20th, Senator Alex Padilla was sworn in as California's first Latino senator. Here now to answer your questions, and some of ours, is Senator Alex Padilla. Thanks for joining us here on Inside California Politics. We are now more than a year into the coronavirus pandemic. This week, Governor Newsom announced California could be back to business as usual by mid-June, but many Californians, they are still struggling.
Many Americans have received a $1,400 direct payment under the coronavirus relief package signed into law last month. You joined, Senator, with 20 other Democrats in the U.S. Senate to urge President Biden in a letter to consider recurring direct payments. How would that work? And given that businesses are starting to reopen and workers are returning to their jobs, is it necessary?
Well, I do think it may very well be necessary, and here is why. We, as you mentioned, have passed the 1-year mark since the official beginning of the pandemic, and it's been absolutely clear there's actually been dual pandemics when we stop and think about it. There's certainly the health impacts and devastation of COVID-19, but also the economic impacts of COVID-19, whether it's been on the economy broadly, people losing their jobs, people losing wages because of cutbacks at their place of employment. And so direct assistance to working families has been necessary, but very sporadic throughout the first year of the pandemic. Was proud to be part of the American Rescue Package's passage as one of the first acts as a senator on behalf of California. And I pray that the end of the pandemic is on the horizon, but we don't know. And if the pandemic continues to last throughout the year, there's going to be small businesses and families and state and local governments that will continue to need assistance. So that's why we have to make it clear, as long as the pandemic lasts, the federal government will be there to support American families and small businesses.
Senator, President Biden has also put forward an infrastructure and jobs plan. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but first, staying with the American Rescue Plan. Besides what you talked about already, what is the biggest benefit Californians either will see or are seeing from the president's stimulus plan?
Well, there's so much. The American Rescue Plan has been considered one of the most progressive pieces of legislation since the New Deal. It's on that order of magnitude. Resources for families, resources for small businesses, resources for state and local governments, not just school districts, but some of the elements that aren't talked about as much, but I think are just as significant. Things like expanding unemployment insurance for people who have been out of work for longer stretches of time. The expansion of the earned income tax credit, especially helpful for working families. And the expansion of the child tax credit, that alone has the potential to lift half the nation's children who are living in poverty out of poverty. And in California, that's 500,000 children that we're talking about. So, ongoing work to see if we can make that longer term or even a permanent expansion of the child tax credit, but even short term, profoundly significant.
Democrats now have control of the White House, the Senate, and the House. You have the ability to pass legislation without Republican support. And in fact, in the latest stimulus package, it didn't garner a single Republican vote on the Senate side. What happened to compromise in Washington? And should Democrats continue to push through legislation with no Republican support?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because it's beyond me why not a single one of my Republican colleagues was a part of passing the American Rescue Package. COVID has not discriminated. It has impacted communities throughout the country. No state has been spared. No community has been spared, regardless of political leanings. And so we'll continue to try to bring Republican colleagues along, whether it was missed opportunity on the American Rescue Package for them. Infrastructure, there's nothing partisan about, potholes at the local level, roads, bridges, other elements of our infrastructure more broadly. But there's certain things that can't be done with the bare majority in the Senate. You're all aware of the impact and the obstruction that the filibuster represents. So every opportunity we have to make progress and invest in our country through the bare minimum 51 votes, I think it's our obligation to exercise that, because the need is so great and so urgent.
Let's stay with the filibuster. Are you worried if the standard in the Senate, the threshold is lowered from 60 to 50 votes, it will come back to maybe haunt Democrats in the future if Republicans possibly take back the Senate?
I've heard that argument, and my response is that's a chance I'm willing to take. There's so many things that we need to act on an urgent basis. COVID-19, definitely a front burner item. I made that clear soon after my appointment. But if you want to talk about better access to healthcare, combating climate change, which is an existential threat, and we continue to see the impacts of extreme weather patterns. We talk about immigration reform, which is long overdue, or the urgency to defend voting rights and protect all of us from the threat of voter suppression. This is all critical. And if we remove the filibuster, if that's what it took because Republicans refused to participate, and we get this done, then I think the country is going to be better off for it. And I'm not going to have to worry about the political ramifications because it's doing what's right by the country.
Let's move on to student loan debt. President Biden has expressed support for $10,000 in cancellation of student loan debt. Some of your Democratic Senate colleagues are calling for $50,000 in debt cancellation through executive action. How much student loan debt should be canceled in your view? And we have a viewer asking who might qualify for that.
Sure. I think the answer to that is frankly the more the better. I know some people have asked, well, is this really an issue of equity separate and apart from relieving students of that student debt? If you have student debt, it's because you qualified for financial aid to begin with. And we know that higher education is something that we encourage all young people to consider and to pursue, and it has its economic benefit for all of us further down the road. But between coming out of college with enormous amounts of debt, in a down economy, it's harder to land a job, and the devastating consequences of prolonged debt early in your career and early in your professional life. We can eliminate that and get young people a better footing as they start their career and be more, not just productive in their individual lives, but be more contributors to our overall economy.
All right, let's talk infrastructure. Finally, Infrastructure Week. As we mentioned, the next major legislative initiative by the Biden administration is a $2.3 trillion infrastructure bill called the American Jobs Plan. So you support this. If this is passed and signed by the president, what is the most significant way the people of California will benefit? And what do you say to Republicans who believe this should be about steel and concrete, not include things like expanding broadband access and subsidizing electric vehicles?
Well, look, I think we have, just as with the American Rescue Plan, a tremendous opportunity to do a lot of good through the infrastructure package. Look, I'm a proponent of looking at a bigger dollar figure, not a smaller one. It's what economists continue to recommend, a bigger infusion in stimulating the economy, not a lesser amount. We saw how long it took to recover from the Great Recession. Let's not make that same mistake. If we invest more right now, it's going to be a quicker recovery, and more people will benefit from it. And as far as whether we're narrow in scope or broader in scope, look, we'd be missing a big opportunity if all we did was address some deferred maintenance in California and around the country. So I am a proponent of thinking not just roads and bridges, but looking at infrastructure broadly, water infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, broadband deployment, as you mentioned. So much of our economy, our healthcare, our education system is built on or relies on having that high quality internet connection. We look at the capacity of our healthcare infrastructure. My God, we've all been reminded this last year during the pandemic of the need for not just access to healthcare, quality of healthcare, affordability of healthcare, but literally the capacity of our healthcare system to meet the growing population that we have. Education's another one, K-12 schools that need a lot of love, repairs, new construction in areas with growing populations, and of course our higher education system. So no shortage of infrastructure needs to meet deferred maintenance and prepare for the future. And so let's think big and of course figure out how to pay for it.
Yeah, that being said, what do you think is the biggest need in California specifically?
In California, well, certainly transportation infrastructure. As the economy is beginning to reopen, we're already seeing the traffic that we certainly didn't miss throughout the course of the pandemic. Housing. A big part of the housing unaffordability crisis in many regions of the state is simply a function of supply and demand.
You said to think big. Thinking big can involve big costs. You've talked about several ambitious Democratic initiatives. President Biden plans to pay for infrastructure by raising the corporate tax rate to 28% from 21%. But a recent report shows some of the biggest corporations in the country, like Amazon, are using loopholes to pay no federal tax at all. Can you guarantee that the middle class will not be stuck shouldering this tax burden? Or do you believe perhaps that higher taxes are necessary for everyone at some point?
Look, I think where we begin in terms of tax increases is not on working families, but on the wealthiest individuals and on these large corporations by raising the rates. By the way, if we were to raise it from 21 to 28%, it's still far short of the 35% it was not that long ago. So it's simply undoing some of the breaks that they didn't need, but were given by prior administrations. And the way we're going to cover this package, look, I think there is going to be some on the quote unquote federal credit card. There may be some deficit spending here. I think a lot should be covered through these tax corrections. You know, our Republican colleagues certainly weren't asking the fiscal impact questions when they were giving away tax breaks to the wealthy and corporations not that long ago.
All right, we have many more questions ahead. We're going to ask you to stand by, Senator. Still ahead on our Inside California Politics Town Hall with Senator Alex Padilla. We're going to discuss immigration and the record surge of migrant children arriving at our border.
Welcome back to our Inside California Politics Town Hall with Senator Alex Padilla. Senator, just this week, there was yet another high-profile mass shooting in the United States. Here in California, we have some of the strictest gun laws in the country, but we still have mass shootings here. This week, President Biden took some executive actions, as you know. Are more gun laws needed, or is this a mental health issue, which is what the Republicans argue?
Yeah. No, it's not just a mental health issue. We do need to make improvements on how we invest in mental health throughout the country, but this is a safety issue. And so, look, I applaud President Biden for doing what he can via executive order, but there's a lot of common sense gun safety measures that Congress needs to act on, whether it's strengthening and broadening the background check requirements for people who are acquiring or purchasing weapons of all types. In my mind, it should be a no-brainer to reinstate the assault weapons ban. In addition to that, for example, you know, we have, as you mentioned, in California, some of the stricter laws as it pertains to weapons, but what's clearly evident is if different states have different levels of protections, then there's weaknesses in the entire system. So consistency and a national policy when it comes to gun safety is absolutely warranted.
Let's talk about immigration and our borders. Thousands of unaccompanied minors are being held in U.S. border facilities, including hundreds at San Diego's Convention Center. Last month alone, nearly 19,000 children were picked up by Customs and Border Protection. That's a record high. Republicans say, as you know, the Biden administration is to blame. There were, in fact, far fewer border crossings under the Trump administration. Did the former administration have any good ideas worth keeping in place? Was it wrong to rescind the Remain in Mexico policy?
Yeah, no, like I'll tell you what I think was wrong to rescind. It was wrong to rescind the opportunity that a lot of these individuals, and even in some cases some families, to apply for asylum from their native countries. If you look at who it is that's showing up on the southern border, yes, there's a good number of Mexicans, but also people from Central American countries that under the Obama administration were able to apply for asylum from their home countries without having to present themselves at the border. The Trump administration did all that, undid that. They've also starved the agencies responsible for handling asylum seekers and shrunk their capacity, which is why we're seeing the choke points that are manifesting themselves once again. I would like to make a couple of points. Number one, this increase in numbers in the last few weeks is not the first time. It's nothing new. Every spring has been pretty typical if you go back many years. There's an increase in numbers of folks coming, hoping to enter the United States. Some years it's a big increase, some years it's a smaller increase, but it seems to be a seasonal cyclical pattern. Second, I certainly hope that this doesn't distract us too much from the need for immigration reform for the millions of people who are already living in the United States of America, working here, paying taxes here, contributing to the strength of our nation, who deserve security and, I believe, a pathway to citizenship, including the more than 5 million undocumented immigrants who have been working as essential workers during the course of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Perfect segue there, Senator. Your first piece of legislation in the Senate would provide citizenship to those essential workers. We have a question from a viewer about this very topic. Would your legislation provide a pathway for documented essential workers or only apply to undocumented essential workers?
No, it would be for all non-citizen essential workers. And, let me just sort of try to make my argument because it's pretty common sense. I mean, you, both of you have seen this as I have, how many Facebook posts, how many tweets, how many gestures of goodwill and appreciation from our friends and our neighbors for essential workers this last year. Workers in the healthcare industry, workers in agriculture, not just farm workers, grocery workers, transportation workers, construction workers, people willing to risk their lives and their health and that of their families to protect the rest of us who have maybe the luxury of Zooming from home and to keep the economy going. My God, they have earned protections, peace of mind, and a pathway to citizenship. That's what my bill would offer.
Senator Padilla, we have much more ahead with you here on our exclusive Inside California Politics Town Hall. You're sticking around. Coming up next, we are going to discuss vaccine passports. Should they be required? We'll be right back.
And welcome back to our town hall with Senator Alex Padilla. Senator, there has been some debate about this idea of a vaccine passport, basically some kind of proof of vaccination that would be required for certain activities. The Biden administration is supporting the business community, which is pushing for this passport idea or some sort of proof. Is that enough? Should there be legislative action or an executive action that requires a vaccine passport for at least some activities like air travel?
Yeah, well, I think the public health experts haven't recommended this yet. And so I think for the meantime, we're best to remain focused on improving the vaccine supply, distribution, ensuring every adult can get the vaccine sooner rather than later. And so we're spending a lot of time on that right now. We know there's some folks that may be reluctant to sign up for the vaccine because of disinformation they come across online, for example. And so it's important to remind people the vaccine is safe, it's effective, eligibility is opening up. So as soon as you're eligible, please make your appointments. If you haven't already, get the vaccine as soon as you can.
But just so we know your position, are you for or against this idea of a vaccine passport?
Well, I mean, not necessarily against it. I don't think we need it yet. Again, I follow, when it comes to public health, the guidance of the public health scientists and the experts here. So they haven't said that we need a mandate for a vaccine passport. Let's do what we need to do as a nation. We all need to do our part to get this pandemic behind us.
Senator, as you know, there's currently a recall effort underway here in the state of California against Governor Newsom. In a state of 40 million people, it only takes 1.5 million votes to initiate a recall election of a governor who was elected with an overwhelming majority. Critics of that recall process say this is evidence that the system is broken. As our former Secretary of State, do you agree with that? And if so, what should be done about it?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, yes, wish we weren't being distracted, and a recall, if it does qualify, wouldn't have to spend the resources necessary for this special election. I'll tell you what my biggest observation is. It's offensive and hypocritical that the same Republican forces that refuse to hold Donald Trump accountable, if for nothing else, the deadly insurrection of January 6th, are now trying to hold Governor Newsom accountable for Trump's failures to address the COVID-19 pandemic. It couldn't be further off base. If the recall does qualify, I stand with the governor to defeat the recall and keep working on behalf of Californians to get us through the pandemic and rebuild the economy.
All right, we're going to take one more break. Coming up, we're going to ask Senator Padilla about his top legislative priorities in Washington as the nation recovers from the coronavirus pandemic.
Senator Padilla, right now, COVID has obviously dominated much of the political agenda in Washington, but Californians want to know what you will deliver for our state if you continue as one of our senators. So is there one promise you can make right now about an accomplishment that you'll be able to point to when you do ask for votes again in 2022?
Yeah, well, the step number one was delivering on COVID relief, which we've done in a big way with the American Rescue Plan. Next is both immigration reform. No state has more at stake in immigration reform than the state of California, and this infrastructure package, as I said earlier, not just to simply address some deferred maintenance, but we have an opportunity to tackle climate change through smart investments in our infrastructure and create a whole lot of good paying jobs as well.
Sounds like a few promises there. Thank you for joining us for this exclusive town hall. Senator Padilla, unfortunately, we're out of time. We will post more of our conversation on our Twitter page at CA Insider, where viewers can join the conversation using the hashtag InsideCAPolitics.
You can watch Inside California Politics broadcasting statewide to 28 million Californians every weekend. Thanks for joining us this time. We'll see you next time.